welcome everybody. It's an incredible honor to be here and to be in the presence of Jarod Lew. Those of you who have, it's open today, the exhibit, Kinship, Photography and Connection. So please be sure to go see that. And congratulations, Jarod.
Thank you so much.
For being featured in that exhibit. So behind us, you see some of Jarod's photography that's going to be looping through. And I just have a zillion questions for you, Jarod. I first met Jarod first and only time previous to this, except one Zoom in preparation for this. And we're trying to figure out, it was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 2016. I was in Detroit, and I think it was for the 35th commemoration of when Vincent Chin was killed. And there was a program at the Chinese Community Center, I think in Madison Heights. Yeah. And the program went on, and this young man comes up to me at a certain point and says, hi, I'm Jarod Lew. I'm Vicki Wong's son. And some of you, I wonder how many of you know about the Vincent Chin story? Okay, many of you do. And those of you who know Jarod's photography, it's been written about in many different art and photography magazines. And for this exhibit, Jarod talks about the impact that news had on his photography. But so before we get into that, I just wanted to Jarod, if you would talk about your photography. You, I understand, you were a high school photographer. I mean, you started your work in high school, right? Is that? No, okay.
No. I started photography after college. So I went to Michigan State and got a graphic design degree, and graphic design was transitioning from print to web design. Couldn't get a job. My portfolio was outdated and just kind of antiquated because a lot of the companies in Michigan were transitioning to web. And then I got a random phone call one day from my partner's mom at the time, and she was like, hey, grandma wants to give you a call because she had a dream about you. And I was like, oh, a dream, okay.
And this is after college?
This is after college. I was unemployed, working as some freelance jobs, trying to find an income to, please my mom. And yeah, so I hopped on the phone call with my partner's grandma at the time, and she was like, hey, I had a dream that you worked at our photo studio. How would you like a job? And I was like, okay, yeah, sounds good. I have nothing else going on. After agreeing to work, they started to kind of show me the ways of how to make a high school portrait. I was a high school portrait studio.
That's where the high school connection came.
Yeah.
So you were one of the high school yearbook photographers?
Yeah. For the first year, I was kind of working through it, understanding studio lighting, understanding how to interact with a stranger, and just making pictures. And my only other photography history prior to that was just one course at Michigan State. So I just, pushed through and...
Wait, did you have a camera yet? I mean, before getting the job at the studio?
Yeah, I had an amateur camera that I used for that class and then kind of put away after just my counselors at the time were just like, you have to finish, you cannot take any more photography classes. And so photography was there, but it was kind of not there at the same time until I got into that studio where I became really obsessed with making photographs of people. And then that's exactly where I found out that my mom was engaged to Vincent Chin, which was a complete accident. It was one of the anniversaries where my cousin had texted me, please don't, he was like, don't upset your mom today. And, I was a little angsty at the time. So I was like, why not? What's so special about today? And he was just like, Google the name Vincent Chin, and of course I Googled it during my lunch break, and I think one of the first 2 or 3 images was the Detroit Free Press picture of Vincent Chin and my mom, together on that Free Press cover, and it was just like, went down the Wikipedia hole, and my boss is like, get off the computer, there's people outside, like.
So the name Vincent Chin or any of that had never come up when you were growing up, not among your cousins, not when you guys were playing together, not when your mom was out of earshot or anything?
Yeah, no, it was always this family secret that kind of lived between the generation that was alive at the time, and it was always kind of hidden from the younger generation. So I had no idea until that moment when I got that text message at that photo studio, which feels so like crazy that someone had a dream that I worked at a studio, and then now I'm here at SFMOMA.
Yeah. So in the time before you got that text message from your cousin about, hey, don't say anything that might upset your mom, you were already working at the studio and you had become obsessed with photography. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about your evolution as a photographer, and what were the kind of things you were taking pictures of. I will have a bunch of questions about, after you got that news, from your cousin.
Yeah. The slideshow, you kind of see the beginning stages of me working outside of the photo studio. So I think like a couple years after finding out about Vincent Chin, I had gained some confidence as a photographer, and I, started purchasing my own equipment, and, was diving into film photography when film was cheaper than it is now, and just like becoming obsessed with like making personal projects to keep some sort of creative lifestyle as I was making money at this photo studio. So I was going around my neighborhood making pictures of strangers and friends, and it eventually led to this project titled South of Heaven, where I was photographing suburban neighborhoods that surrounded the city of Detroit. And I was documenting just what the American dream is like in suburbia. And around that time as well, I felt very trapped in Michigan. Like I had dreams of going to New York and becoming an artist out there, but because of the economy at the time, it felt like everything was kind of slowing down, and Detroit was going through this small bankruptcy, and so I felt very trapped. So I started photographing my neighborhood, trying to understand what this idea of the American dream was, which then led to me making pictures in Detroit, because Detroit was also going through this this revamp in identity. They were going through bankruptcy. They were going through, the DIA was about to sell their artworks to pay for things, and it just was a weird time to be an artist in Michigan. So I was making work there too, and then I had gotten into the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery show from one of the portraits that I submitted.
Wait, slow down a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
The leap from the studio and high school shots, and then you're taking pictures in the neighborhood, and then the portrait gallery.
Yeah.
If we could slow down a little bit there. Sorry, I'm still getting over a 4-month-old cough, and it's not COVID. But where did the idea of an American dream and taking pictures of, and I'm guessing you're talking about things that represent America, or like, and in Detroit, the decaying city, things like that. Where did that come from for you?
I think I was, during that obsession of learning photography, I was really, self-teaching myself how to create personal projects. So I was looking at a lot of photographers, like, when you type in like documentary photography on Google, you start to look at like Alex Soth, you start to look at Todd Heido, you start to look at, even like Gregory Crutzen, who's now my professor at Yale, it was just like looking at those guys and trying to understand what makes a powerful image. And I just wanted to do it. And I just was out in the world making pictures and that's the beautiful thing about photography is like it makes you very hyper aware of the environment that you're in, and it makes you question what it means to make a powerful image. So I just kept going out making pictures because at some point, being in the high school photo studio, it becomes mundane. It becomes a little not creative. So I just needed an outlet to like make pictures for myself.
I think we can all imagine. I mean, I still have my high school yearbook, and I look at those pictures. But you saw yourself as doing documentary photography in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because when I met you 6 or 7 years ago, I had the distinct impression that you were doing photojournalism, and that you saw yourself as doing journalistic photography. And I imagined you doing, news shots and things like that. And you had mentioned that Corky Lee was one of your photography mentors, and there was a film here at CAAMFest about photographic justice about Corky's life, and that stuck with me when we met. So I just always had this image that that's the kind of photography you were doing.
Yeah, I think that's what's maybe a little misleading about the work that I was making. That it was mostly a documentary, but I think some people can read the work as photojournalism sometimes, maybe. But I never really thought of myself as a photojournalist. I was connected through Corky from another photojournalist photographer, but I don't know. I stray away from titling myself as a photojournalist because I don't think I'm that.
What's the distinction to you? I'm just curious.
I think like photojournalism, there's this sense that the photograph is telling some sort of fact or truth, whereas a lot of my pictures are these constructed images from memory, or I'm not like basing my photographs on a fact, but it's a general like series of pictures that play with an idea that I'm trying to figure out. So there's no real like factual image or information to each image. Yeah.
Well, let's talk more about that because, well, first let's just close the loop there to the National Portrait Gallery,
Okay.
and so you were creating images and doing documentary photos, and how did that happen?
How did I get into
Getting to the National Portrait Gallery.
Oh, I just submitted it for an open call. I don't know if y'all remember, but there's an image of a young gal sitting in a car at night, and that was the image that was got accepted into the National Portrait Gallery. And that was just through an open call submission that the Smithsonian has every 2-3 years, I think.
Can you tell us a little bit about that image? I mean, it looks, so when I thought of you as a photojournalist, I mean, I imagined you just sort of walking by, oh, here's a parking lot, and I have this picture of this young woman sitting in a car in the dark.
Yeah, no, that was like a pre-planned photo shoot that I had in mind. Originally, the photograph was supposed to be taken inside their house, but the lighting got really bad, and we were kind of wrapping up the shoot, and she was like, I gotta go take this phone call. It's my grandma. My dad had just passed away, so I need to take a phone call. So she like ran into her car to take some privacy, and as I'm sitting there, I'm just like looking at how the interior light of the car was like igniting her face, and it felt like such a dramatic photograph. And I only had one roll of film left, and I loaded it up in the camera, and I was like, don't move, like just turn this way. And she was done talking on the phone, by the way. Like she wasn't still like dealing with grief or anything, but she had turned, and we like set up the photograph, and I made the picture that way. Yeah, it was just, those are the things that photography is.
Waiting for it to scroll up so we can.
Yeah, yeah. This is a newer image of my friend in New York. But yeah, a lot of the times I'm just like very aware of the situation I'm in, and when I see something, I just ask if I can make a photograph. Nothing's ever forced or a surprise for the subject. Everybody knows that they're being photographed when I make a picture. Whereas I think maybe photojournalism, there's no sort of distinction between a staged picture and, yeah, there it is.
This is the one.
Audrey is their name. And this is at a high school football game.
But that wasn't staged, right? The football game one.
No, that one wasn't staged. That one was one of the the first pictures I made during that series where I was just kind of wandering around with a camera.
And right now, these are shots of your kind of Detroit view and the American dream in your mind as you're taking them.
Yeah, I mean, the Detroit was more about this strange period of Detroit going through gentrification and the media kind of hyping up this new Detroit in this bubble that only existed in downtown, but there was such a large, Detroit has so much land, so I was really kind of thinking about all the people that were not affected by this gentrification. Like everybody was being displaced out of Detroit, pushed out to the outer edges, and I was just kind of driving around in my car, meeting people, asking for stories, making pictures, and it's funny that every time I would make a photograph of somebody, they would allow me to make the picture, but then when I asked if I could send them a print or some sort of gift for that image, they would be like, "No, it's okay. You don't need to send me anything," and they would just kind of disappear from that moment.
No kidding. So
such an interest.
some of your subjects, they just had no connection after that.
Yeah, no connection. A couple folks reached out after I had gained recognition for that work and sent emails to me just thanking me for telling a truthful story of their experience of living in Detroit, which was really nice because I think at the time I wasn't really sure where I was going with that work because it wasn't about my community, and I felt a little bit like an outsider going into the city making work, but I also felt like an insider because I lived in Michigan for my whole life. So I was kind of trying to put myself into conversation with other photographers that were flying from all over the world photographing Detroit because it was, maybe a trendy thing to do. But whenever I would look at those pictures, I just thought I think I could do maybe a little bit better than that because I have a connection to the place and history.
Well, you certainly do. And it's really interesting. Jarod and I were talking, really, this is the first time we've ever had a chance to talk to each other, except for that one very brief encounter, during the commemoration of, it's now 41 years since Vincent Chin was killed, but at the 35th, and I actually got my start as a journalist in Detroit, and this whole thing about, but I left, and I lived in Detroit for 10 years and wrote about Detroit a lot, some of the same neighborhoods. I very much connect to your Detroit pictures because that's the Detroit I knew. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't mind us talking then, there was a shift. Some of these photographs now in your show are really very different kind of compositions. They look like you've put a lot of thought into everything you have in the shot, not just the people, but the, I think of the tchotchkes or the things like that that are in there. And I just, if you could say a little bit about that, and that's part of what's about the show now, right?
Yeah. I think, after getting that grant and then being in the Smithsonian show, I gained a lot of confidence as an artist. And And I just started to really think about my own history with Vincent Chin and what that meant to be like this, Chinese American whose mom was engaged to Vincent Chin. But while I was thinking about that, I just started to question why I didn't have an Asian American community. Growing up, I lived in a very white suburb. Most of my friends were white. And so I started revisiting that history because I felt like I had more confidence to explore something more complex to myself and about myself. So I started reaching out to people through, Instagram, Facebook. At one point, I had a Tinder page with my artist bio and my pictures, and was like, if you want to have a conversation, I would love to have that. And
Okay,
surprisingly,
maybe I won't ask you too much more about what you found there, or maybe I should.
Nothing crazy. It was very, like, a lot of friends were found through those tools of social media. And yeah, so I started just like making these portraits of strangers and friends, and at one point I think like I had 15 or 20 pictures in my studio, and it felt very, it felt like it didn't explore the complexities of an experience that I knew. So I started to just push through it, keep making photographs, and at one point I was sitting at my friend's room, and it's, their bedroom was decorated in this like European art. It was decorated in punk rock posters, and they had like high school medals and stuff. And I just felt like this moment where I felt like the most Asian thing in this bedroom. And it was so strange. And I was just like, if I turned this person away, like, are you able to tell that this photograph is of a young Chinese American? Like what makes this picture about our experience? And I got really frustrated, and was like, okay, let's wrap it up. And we had finished the photo shoot, and we were like, saying our goodbyes. I was walking into her mom's main living room, and it's decorated in all of these Chinese objects and scroll paintings and figures, and even like the kitchen table was like this like beautiful rosewood carved table. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I kind of feel like the least Asian thing in this bedroom. And I was just like, well, how do I convey that through a picture? So I started revisiting a lot of the old photographs I made, and started juxtaposing these like still life pictures that I was making in my family's home with portraits, and it really started to speak to me, like how complex the interior home can be in a picture. So I started making these photographs and these portraits in these spaces to really explore these ideas of alienation, to explore these feelings of invisibility and visibility within like the domestic space of my friends' parents' houses. And that's kind of, yeah, and it also really questioned about like Asian American aesthetics, like how complex Asian American aesthetics can be. And
so I'd like to just know a little bit your own evolution into this exploration, because you were saying that you grew up in a suburb of Detroit. Mm-hmm. Most of your friends and people that you knew were white. What I know about, the little I know about your mother and the Chinese American and Asian American community in Detroit is that it's pretty closely knit if you are part of especially the restaurant communities. And your mother, I know, was an immigrant herself, and Vincent's family was entirely restaurant and laundry background. And I think I, over time, had met some of your mom's cousins too. Some of your uncles, I think, and so and your mother speaks Cantonese, Toisanese.
Cantonese, yeah. And my dad's parents speaks Toisanese.
And so, did you grow up speaking some Chinese or being around? I mean, because I think I read somewhere that you would often go to, your mom had a favorite Cantonese restaurant or something.
Yeah. No, I don't understand, or I don't speak any Cantonese, but I can understand what I thought was a good amount. But my mom, about 5 years ago was like, it's just preschool level, baby. You don't understand anything. And I'm like, okay, thanks, Mom.
Yes, the uncritical Asian parent, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realize how tight-knit the community, like for my generation, we're quite scattered around the Metro Detroit area. And it wasn't, I think every time I went to a Chinese restaurant with my mom and dad and they like started chatting with somebody else, I just assumed that it was like a family friend. But, well, I mean, they are family friends, but I didn't know how tight-knit the group of the community was back then. And maybe we could talk about that because I think you were in that community for a little bit, and maybe you could share what that's like when
Sure.
when you moved to Detroit.
Well, when I had gone to Detroit, it was as a child of the 60s and 70s, and it was really to go be a labor organizer. I didn't go to Detroit thinking I would find an Asian American or Chinese American community at all. And was Stanley's Chinese restaurant still around when you were a kid?
It doesn't sound familiar, no.
Okay, well, it was the Chinese restaurant to go to. Very magnificent, odd-looking building, a spaceship-looking building. It didn't look anything like you would associate with Asia, but it was the most popular restaurant. And I went and I worked in a car factory, a Chrysler factory, and all of my coworkers, when I'd say, where do you go for Chinese food? Stanley's. And the thing, so I went to Stanley's, which had white tablecloths and stuff. I didn't grow up going to, I went to Chinatown restaurants that didn't have white tablecloths. But they also served Chinese food first with a lot of bread. So you would sit down and there would be like bread rolls that would come. And I remember thinking like, what kind of Chinese restaurant is this? There's like no bread. Are you kidding?
Fusion.
Fusion, very much, about survival. How would a Chinese restaurant survive and, wherever they end up landing? But I did not know a Chinese community until Vincent Chin was killed. And then people started coming together.
What was that like to see that come together because of your words and journalistic jobs and effort?
It was incredible, I have to say, because did any of you see the Fanny concert a little bit before? And Fanny was, yeah, all right. And please be sure to tune in on Monday evening for the Fanny documentary on PBS. When they came together in 1964, there was no word Asian American. The words Asian and American came together here in the Bay Area during the Third World strikes at San Francisco State and at UC Berkeley. And that was when Asian young activists came together for the first time and didn't call themselves Chinese American or Filipino American or Japanese American or any of the other different ethnicities. They said, we are Asian American. In Detroit, in 1983, the 9 months after Vincent had been killed, when it made it into the news that that photo you mentioned that was in the Detroit Free Press, and it wasn't about Vincent or your mother's, the fact that they were Chinese American, it was just how tragic. This couple was about to be married, and on the night of the bridegroom's bachelor party, he was killed. It didn't make any reference to the anti-Asian hate that was going on at all. But so I went to those first few meetings where there were a lot of Chinese Americans because Vincent Chin was Chinese American. And there would be maybe one or two Japanese Americans, a couple Filipino Americans. And the question was, could the Chinese American community even get along with the Japanese American community? Could we work together? I mean, it was that elementary at that time. And maybe I'll just shift to a couple other slides here. If we could stop the loop and go to the the other still slideshow. These are some of the representations of photographs from that time period. In the late 1970s to the early 1980s, this was your mother's fiancé, Vincent Chin. And Lily Chin is there holding, and this is a question I have for photographers and graphic artists out there. Lily Chin is holding a picture of Vincent when he was like a high school freshman. And he's got that long hair, he has big glasses, he looks nerdy. This is the photograph of Vincent just not long before he was killed. Very different, but so many journalistic editors, they choose the nerd picture. And I've actually made it a mission to say, don't use that picture. This is the man. This is Vincent Chin, the man who was killed. And next to him is a poster that was in a museum as just like, hey, here's another American object. You know, at the time, a Japanese car with the, most exaggerated, grotesque caricatures of what somebody, Asian or a Japanese enemy, or in this case, a Japanese Zero pilot would have, dropping a bomb on the city of Detroit. And that was the climate that your mother and Vincent were going to be married in. And you can see some of just the bumper stickers, Buy American, Toyota, Datsun, Honda, Pearl Harbor. And so when we think of today, where we are today, and all of the anti-Asian hate that exists because of China and associating China, Chinese people, and COVID, this was the intensity of the hatred that existed in the 1980s, and except it was toward Japan. And Vincent Chin, a Chinese American, was killed. And so to your question about the Asian communities coming together, they never did prior to that, except one weekend a year in Detroit. And I don't know if this still existed when you were, coming up, but it was called the Ethnic Festivals of Detroit. Did you ever go to one of the ethnic festivals?
That did not exist.
One weekend, there was the Far Eastern Festival, and there would be downtown over at the Hart Plaza, there would be kiosks and tents that would be set up, and the different Asian groups, Asian American groups, would set up food and have performances, ribbon dances or, sugarcane dances and things like that. And that was the only time. But that cultural connection actually made it possible when Vincent Chin was killed for the groups then to, say, hey, we know each other from the Far Eastern Festival, we're having a meeting to see what could happen, because anybody who looked East Asian was a target for hate. And so I don't know how your parents managed to keep you from knowing anything about Vincent Chin. I mean, I do know that K through 12, even in Michigan, where this landmark civil rights case happened, that even today, K through 12, it's not taught. And
Well, that's exactly why. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't taught in school, and I think families have a good, if there's like a pact to keep something secret, that's they're pretty good at it, I think. Especially for the children. So, I didn't know anything about it until 2012, and also I just keep looking at that picture that Lily's holding, and I'm like, there's nothing wrong about looking like a nerd in a photograph.
That's true.
I think it's a great picture, but they just kept it a secret the whole time.
Well, I did want to also ask you how it really, in a way, changed your world, too. I mean, your whole worldview, not just your art, but, I mean, your art is part of your worldview, the lens that you see things. And so I guess I wanted to, I have this one quote here of yours. My work has always grappled with what goes unnoticed, overlooked, and kept from public view, even kept as a secret, like my mom's connection to Vincent Chin. And so So I do want to sort of go more deeply into how your work changed. And so for example, I was telling Jarod that these two pictures that are part of the loop that were in there, these really speak to me because this is the Detroit that I knew. Vast vacant lots where when you have 10% of the population suddenly become unemployed and have to leave. I mean, Detroit shrank from, a bustling, busy city that when I got there, I could get a job in 2 weeks in an auto factory. And these union factory work were very well paid 10 times more than the minimum wage. I mean, back then, as a college graduate, I didn't tell them I went to college, but I got a job when minimum wage was $1.50 an hour. At the Chrysler plant, I got $10 an hour, and every benefit you can imagine. That would be like today, if minimum wage is $13 an hour, that you would get a job paying $130 an hour. It made that much a difference, and that's why people were so angry and so upset and so miserable when they lost those jobs. That was their future, and they lost it. That was their children's future, and they no longer had that. And instead, what happened were just neighborhoods that they were complete vacant lots because the houses were torn down and destroyed, or you would watch them disappear because brick by brick, people would come and scavenge the homes. And so that was what you were capturing in the beginning.
I mean, I don't think it was that bad. It was mostly just daily life in, I think, around 2014 to 2016. Yeah, I mean, it was areas that were going overlooked, and folks were frustrated that they were being overlooked. So I just wanted to, I just wanted to hear the stories and capture or like think about these like very dramatic scenes that you don't see on the news when New Detroit was becoming a thing. You know, it was all about this gentrification of this bubble that's in downtown Detroit and how great is Detroit, and but then there was this other world that was being overlooked.
So the two hands here, I mean, of course, every picture is a story. And to me, I'm imagining that you got these guys doing the dap when, and you said, would you do that again? And can I take a picture? I mean,
yeah, it was great because they were kind of, they weren't allowed in school that day because they didn't have their high school uniforms. Apparently they didn't get the email, so they were just all hanging out in front of this parking lot in downtown Detroit. So they like walked into downtown Detroit to hang out, and I had just luck of a draw. I was walking around and saw them, and they just asked if I could take their picture, and I was like, absolutely, and we kind of hung out. I have videos of them performing, like rapping, which is really fun, but the other image of the smoke was me just driving, and those two kids were like standing there just staring at this fire that was happening on the other side of the lot, or on the other side of the trees, and they were just saying like, we've been staring at this for an hour, but we were watching the same fire last week. And I thought that was just such a sad but also very moving story from those two children.
Well, I've been to Detroit a lot of times, and since those days when I lived there, and even most recently, I've gone to neighborhoods that I used to live in, and this is what one of my neighborhoods looks like, So, and then there's the switch, and here's where this is your title shot for this exhibit. Please remove your shoes.
Please take off your shoes.
Please take off your shoes. And so I was asking you, where did you get that idea? Is this your garage, your parents' home, or?
No, this is my friend's garage, and this was made during the pandemic, so we were on lockdown, and I'd always thought about these parties that my uncle and my family members would have, and everybody would just put their shoes in the parking lot. And I wanted to make that image, but because we were in the pandemic, it was like, no way, there was no way anybody was having
People weren't
parties.
showing up and, at a big party.
Well, yeah, nobody wanted to die. So we were like, we were all in lockdown, but I really wanted to keep this momentum of like making photographs, but also making photographs in a safe way because of the environment that we were in at the time. So I asked my friend if I could make a picture of this, of like a bunch of shoes in a garage outside at their house. And we gathered all of their shoes and some of my shoes. We just threw it into a big pile, kind of arranged it. And I was making pictures of that, and my friend's dad comes home from, I think, work, or maybe at the restaurant that he was at, that he owns, and he was just like, "Why are these shoes on a big pile?" And I'm like, well, I'm just like recreating a memory that I had as a kid of like family parties where people would take off their shoes outside in the garage and, come in to have a good time. And, he's like from China, and he was like looking at it, and he was like, no. If this was an authentic, real Chinese party, it would all be laid out neatly. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And that's what I did. I laid it out neatly, and he like looked at it, and he was like giving me the thumbs up. And he's like, yeah, that's exactly how it should be. And I was like, okay, cool. And I like made the picture, but I loved like how the shoes stray away from the door. Like I wanted something to be kind of off about it. And yeah, that's how that picture came about, which is, that photograph was made, I think maybe right around the time I applied for a portfolio prize, or maybe it was a little after, but I was just really adamant on making work in a safe way during the pandemic.
So you didn't plan to put the snowblower there?
No.
And the jade plant or anything like that?
No, all of that was there except for the shoes. I think the only other thing I brought to that photograph were the plastic stools. I just wanted some color, so I added some color.
Well, your friend's father, and putting the shoes very neatly, I have to say this is the neatest shoe thing that I have ever seen, because most ones that I know, and my wife Leah sitting back there, she says, oh, in Hawaii, it's kapakahi kind. It's just like thrown everywhere, and you have to go find your shoes later. Yeah. So he must have a very neat father, your friend.
Yeah, I mean, I have to respect my elders, so yeah. I trusted him.
Well, this really spoke to me because I just want to say there's you and I, interestingly, we're different generations. You are a creative visual artist. I write, so, and that's the cover of my first book. And I just want to say, I know that
looks pretty neat, though.
Well, yeah, but a couple of them are like,
Okay.
sideways, and the little kid ones and I know you hadn't seen that because you had not known about Vincent Chin, the main story, the Vincent Chin story was one of the motivations of my writing this book.
Yeah. Oh, I knew about Vincent Chin when I made that photograph. I didn't know about that book.
That's what I mean about the book. And I had to go through a lot of just discussion about what can we put on a cover about Asian Americans, Pan-Asian Americans that would represent, that wouldn't just be one culture. And the artist who first came up with this, the cover, started with rice bowls with chopsticks and steaming rice. And when I saw that, I said, no. First of all, not every Asian culture eats rice. Not every Asian culture uses chopsticks. All the bowls and the, cutlery, the ceramics, everything is different. So the shoes became a metaphor there. And I was wondering whether you were thinking, I know you were capturing an image in what you were saying and the color, but were you thinking of it as a metaphor too in your exploration of, Americanness and?
I don't know. I don't think I was thinking about it in a metaphor about Americanness. I think taking off the shoes happens in Asia as well. So it was mostly just me thinking about a memory that I had. And I think, eventually when the photograph evolved to it being pointed away from the door, and there's this hand gesture of "I love you," there can be a narrative that's built from the viewer that's looking at the picture. But initially, when making the picture, I didn't have any sort of narrative like that in mind. But I also want the viewer to look at a picture and have their own narrative, their own memories attached to something that's in the picture. So I don't try to explain too much to the audience that's looking at the picture, because it's really about the memories that people have when looking at these photographs. I want them to really interact with it in a way where it triggers them into thinking about their own childhood experience in their parental home or in a home in general. That's, yeah.
Well, your pictures are very effective, because I've thought of millions of stories around every one of them.
Thank you.
But around the sort of the similar tracks, just different generationally, different mediums, I was thinking of what a turning point it was for you to learn the secret about your mother. Mm-hmm. And so when I was thinking about preparing for our conversation, it just brought to mind to me that, wait a minute, this whole idea of just your whole world changing around learning this secret that your mother had was, my mother had a secret too, that I only learned that she had been an abandoned girl in China. I was 50 years old or older when she told me that, and it just completely changed my whole view about my mother, about my family, about all those things, and it ended up becoming a book that took me 12 years to research and write about what she had gone through. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if people can see the Art Forum article right there, but it's a lot of, sorry, it sounds worse than it is. Yeah, right. Thank
you. How did you react to that secret that you found out when you were 50?
And
was it through your mom, or was it through someone else?
It was through my mother. We were having dinner. She lived in Walnut Creek at Rossmore, and I was visiting my mom, and Leah and I were there having dinner with her, and my mom was. I was in my 50s. My mother was in her 70s, and a lot of our conversation was, "What are your aches and pains today, Mom? And what can we do about them?" But that day, I thought, okay, let's try to think of something else more fun, or pleasant. And all my life, I had been asking my mother about her childhood, and she would never say. It was, and I don't know how, I want to ask you the same thing about your conversations with your mom, but my mother would say, "Oh, that was wartime, a bad memory," and that would be it. And whether it's people who are Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean, there have been Filipino, there have been so many wars and disasters, India, the partition, that generation, it's a bad memory. And so when you hear that, you just stop. And so when my mother would say that, I just didn't go anywhere. So that day I was having dinner, and I just said, "Gee, Mom, too bad you can't tell me about your childhood growing up in China." And that night she said, "Okay, you want to know, I'll tell you." And so, I just kept eating because I was like, I don't want to break the spell. And she started telling me about this incredibly challenging, sad, hard life that she had had as a kid that I had never heard before. And it just blew me away. I didn't know what to do about it, and just to begin to process it. And I have 5 siblings, so then one by one I started calling them and say, did you know this? And when I called my sister, she burst into tears on the phone. And I have to say there is a gender difference, because when I told one of my brothers, he said, oh, that's interesting, that explains a lot. And then sort of went on. And I thought that was the difference between my sister and my brother responding. But, of course, he had to sort of absorb it. So, so the secret that your mom had, were there things that you just as a kid would ask her about, and it would just be like, never mind, I don't want to talk about?
Yeah, I think my mom, growing up, my mom was so happy, like she portrayed herself as this very happy, loving, and still to this day, happy, loving, caring mother. So like I had no idea to question her past, like it was something that I was living with my parents, and it was very free flowing. It was very nice. My dad was a little bit more strict, but my mom, all smiles.
Well, when they told you the story about how they met, that's sort of a safe thing that parents will, their origin story for their kids. Did they have that for you?
It was very brief, yeah. It was like always my dad kind of teasing my mom about how they met, and my mom just being, oh yeah, there's dad always making up stories, and it was just very light-hearted. It was very light when it came to how they met. And very fleeting. Like those stories didn't go in depth until recently, where my partner Sunhei was just like, tell us more, and then eventually the story came out. But yeah, so I never really questioned my parents' history growing up.
Well, so there's your mother, and when she was with Vincent. I think your mother must have been 25 years old then, 20, something like that. He was 27, so 25, 20, I'm not even sure. And so I don't know if you know this, Jarod, but people always ask. I had to give a talk about anti-Asian hate and the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month earlier this week. 2 days ago, I was asked, and what about Vincent's fiancée? What is her life like? What happened to her? And when I got to know Vincent's mother very well, and was an activist, in trying to get justice for Vincent, because his killers got probation for beating him to death with a baseball bat. And that's when the Asian community all came together to fight for civil rights for Asian Americans, and under the name Asian Americans, and for civil rights that had never happened before. And so we would ask. I was, in the beginning, I did the publicity. I did the press releases. I had already become a journalist. I knew what a press release looked like, a press conference. So I would do those things and take the pictures. And I asked Lily Chin, Vincent's mother, and what about Vicky? Does Vicky want to tell her story? And I have to tell you, Mrs. Chin, Vincent's mother, would just get this incredibly sad look on her face and say, Vicky doesn't want to talk about any of this. And so I always took that for the last 40 years as a message when I get asked all the time at any of these events, what about the fiancé? And I just say, she wants her privacy. She, that you can imagine what a devastating tragedy this was, 4 days before their wedding. And so, so I never tried to pursue or ask your mom anything, but I have wondered with the, we've gone on to do the publicity, the education involved. This is the Legacy Guide to Vincent Chin, which, by the way, all of you can find, vincentchin.org. It's available free with the whole story. And your mom is in these pictures, and I've wondered over the years, is this something that we are doing that is hurtful to your mother? And there has been no way for me to know that. So I just, and I've always hoped that it wasn't, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think my mom is uncomfortable thinking about these publications that are coming out. And I think she actively tries to stay away from that as a way to survive. You know, it's like, I mean, to go through something like that and then, and try, I mean, yeah, and try to move on from it is something that I don't think will ever, like, she'll never be able to move on. So there's this like active, consistent thing of just like, if I don't think about it, if, you know, I'm gonna be able to survive in that way.
And in the in the meantime, you're getting renowned, you know, for your photography, and the art forum and the different, you know, photographic journals are just making the connection there, and you talk about it, you know, in your own work. How is that with, you know, how do you how do you talk about that with your mom? Because she must be very proud of you with the work you're doing.
Yeah, she is very proud, but I think like actively I tell or I express that Please Take Off Your Shoes isn't about the hypervisibility of racial violence. It's not, it was, you know, Vincent Chin was this moment where it inspired me to think about my community. So the work isn't about that. It's about the community that forms when you're actively looking for it and when you're photographing it and you're just, yeah, you know, it's not about that history. So my mom is happy with the fact that I'm making work that's about my community.
Yes, yes, and still, this, what you can't see here in that Art Forum article is this is a picture of your mom.
Yes.
Right? And she has asked you to obscure her images.
Yes.
From what I understand and what I've read in the journals.
Yes.
And so she doesn't want you to take a picture of her either.
It was a creative decision for me to not photograph my mom, but photograph my mom at the same time. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but the whole project is about, you know, thinking about my family's history and thinking about my mom. I just wanted this way of photographing my family, but respecting my mom's privacy while making interesting photographs of the family that she has created post trauma of that history.
And so what kind of conversations does she have with you about these things? Because, you know, when you found out through your cousin, from what I've read, it took you a while before you actually asked your mom about this. And
there's no conversation. Yeah, it's yeah, I think there was this moment that, you know, during the pandemic, there was a lot of anti-Asian hate and a lot of people reaching out to me to reach, you know, to get to my mother. And for a second, she was about to do an interview and we had scheduled a time and it was about to happen. And then she called and was just had this very, I've never heard my mom sound like this, but she was just like, I cannot do it. And since then, I'm not about re-triggering my mom into thinking about these things. I'm not, you know, she's been able to survive in this way, and I don't want to disrupt that. So out of respect for my mom, I made these photographs obscuring her identity for a different project, which I wasn't aware that I was going to be talking about today, but yeah.
so I just want to warn you that it's available online in 7 different languages. And so your mom is in these photos in 7 different languages. And, you know, the story about, you know, so.
I mean, also, I don't know, I keep looking at this photograph and I'm just thinking like, that is my mom, but it's not my mom, you know? Like the mom that I have now is completely different from the person in that photograph. So I don't know. I just thought I'd express that.
Well, so I wanted to just segue back to your work too. I mean, this work. This is one of the exhibits upstairs on the 3rd floor. This is the size of this entire wall. I mean, they've blown this picture up,
Yeah.
and it's amazing. And I find your work to be so complex and whimsical, and that you have this sense of humor here. And so I just wanted to, I know we're closing in on time, and so I wanted to bring it back to this, because I would love to know more about, did you collect these Pokemon animals and the panda? And, you know, I have plenty of little tchotchkes and things like that that make me happy, and they think about my Asian American, Chinese American culture, and, you know, little Chairman Mao's and Chiang Kai-shek's running around that I collected after my last book, and, you know, or little Bruce Lee's, and, you know, what was that?
Do you think that's me?
I do not think that's you. I do not know. Is that you?
No. Well, you said,
did you
did I collect all of those?
No, but maybe
Yeah.
you did collect them, but I don't think those are your legs.
Yeah, no. Well, I don't want to ruin the magic of the photograph, so I won't say how that was made, but it was inspired by somebody who has a lot of plushies, and I really made that picture to question, like, you know, it's also about like Asian American aesthetics. So a lot of the other photographs, you see kind of this dated aesthetic of the home, and you know, in conversation with those photographs, I wanted to know, or wanted to explore this idea, like, what does a new Asian American aesthetic look like? So that was a picture that I made to be a part of that conversation.
Can you talk about what inspired you to bury the person in, or was that?
This idea of invisibility and visibility.
Ah,
Yeah.
right, okay.
Yeah.
Very much, wow. Well, I did get a signal. I had also been warned that, okay, this, because I was going to see if there were any pressing questions about that. Nadine, is that permissible? Okay, all right, we're already over. My apologies.
No worries.
But I've had a great time talking with you, Jarod. Please
had a great
thank
time.
Jarod
Thank
Lew.
you.
Go upstairs, 3rd floor. That's where all of these and more are up there. Congratulations.
Yeah,
again.
thank you. And make sure you take a nice selfie with Pikachu.